The soft chime of the bookstore doorbell echoed in Elena's ears for a few moments after Daniel left. She stood there quietly, the folded piece of paper still in her hand. Just a few seconds ago, it had been an ordinary evening, a quiet bookstore, the cool air after rain, and a conversation with a stranger. But now, something felt different. She slowly turned her gaze toward the window. Outside, the yellow streetlights reflected on the wet pavement. Rainwater still shimmered across the sidewalks. Daniel was nowhere in sight. He had already disappeared into the New York night. Elena took a slow breath. Then she gently sat back down in the reading chair. She unfolded the paper again. Daniel's address. And beneath it, the sentence he had written. Some stories only find those who are brave enough to look for them. Her fingers paused on that line. A dozen thoughts quietly stirred in her mind. Was this simply an interesting conversation? Or had something actually begun tonight? She carefully folded the paper again and placed it inside her notebook. Maybe it was just a strange coincidence, she murmured to herself. But deep down, she knew she wouldn't forget this meeting so easily. Across the bookstore, the owner had begun dimming the lights. "We're closing soon," he said gently. Elena nodded. "Yes, I'm leaving as well." A few minutes later, she stepped outside into the cool New York night. The air smelled faintly of rain. Taxis passed by. Somewhere down the street, soft jazz music drifted out from a small bar. But Elena's thoughts kept circling around one word. Philadelphia. She had heard the name of the city many times before. But tonight, the name carried a mystery. And that strange symbol, the one Daniel had shown her earlier. A curved shape, something between a heart and a compass. She slipped her hand into the pocket of her coat. Her notebook was still there. And inside it, the folded paper. Elena allowed herself a small smile. "Searching," she whispered softly. Then she began walking toward the subway station. She didn't know it yet. But this small meeting was about to change the direction of her entire life. A few days later, New York, 1973. Morning sunlight filtered softly through the window of Elena's small apartment. She sat near the window with a cup of coffee. Her notebook lay open on the table. But today she wasn't editing a manuscript. Instead, a blank page stared back at her. She was thinking about something bigger. Her eyes drifted again to the small folded paper resting on the page. Daniel's address. 3 days had passed. And during those 3 days, she had probably read that note at least 10 times. "This is ridiculous," she muttered quietly. She had only met the man twice. And yet she kept thinking about him. But it wasn't just Daniel. What truly lingered in her mind was the feeling she had experienced that night. Possibility. The beginning of a story. Outside, New York was slowly waking up. People hurried to work. Buses rolled through the streets. The city returned to its usual rhythm. And in that moment, Elena made a decision. She quickly closed her notebook. Then she opened her closet and pulled out a small travel bag. Just a one-day trip, she told herself. But the quiet smile on her face suggested it might become much more than that. A few hours later, Penn Station, New York. The station buzzed with movement. Announcements echoed through the hall. Passengers hurried toward their platforms. Elena stood at the ticket counter. "1 ticket," she said. The clerk glanced up. "Where to?" Elena paused for just a second. Then she spoke the name that had been lingering in her mind for days. Philadelphia. The clerk printed the ticket and slid it across the counter. Elena picked it up. And in that moment, a strange mix of excitement and nervousness rushed through her. She still didn't know what she was truly going to find there. Maybe Daniel. Maybe the mysterious symbol. Or maybe herself. But one thing had become clear. Her story was no longer going to stay inside the borders of New York. And somewhere far away, in the old streets of Philadelphia, a mystery was quietly waiting for her, one that might change the way she understood love forever. The train pulled away from Penn Station with a slow metallic groan. Elena sat by the window, her small travel bag resting beside her feet. Outside, New York's tall buildings slowly began to slide past the glass like silent giants drifting away. Soon the crowded skyline softened into bridges, warehouses, and long stretches of open tracks. The rhythm of the train wheels settled into a steady beat. Clack, clack, clack. Elena rested her elbow on the window frame and watched the world blur past. She still couldn't quite believe what she had done. 3 days ago she had been sitting at her desk, editing someone else's novel. Now she was on a train to Philadelphia, chasing a mysterious symbol and a man she barely knew. She laughed quietly to herself. This is exactly the kind of reckless decision I usually edit out of books, she murmured. Across from her, an elderly woman looked up from her newspaper and smiled. First time traveling alone. Elena blinked slightly. Is it that obvious? The woman chuckled. You've been staring out that window like someone about to start an adventure. Elena thought about that for a moment. Adventure. The word sounded strange when applied to her life. Maybe I am, she admitted. The woman folded her newspaper. Well, she said warmly, those usually start with a strange decision. Elena smiled politely, but her mind drifted again. To Daniel. To that strange symbol. To Philadelphia. 2 hours later. Philadelphia, 1973. The train slowly rolled into the station. Elena stepped down onto the platform, feeling the unfamiliar weight of a new city around her. Philadelphia felt different from New York immediately. New York was loud, restless, constantly rushing. Philadelphia felt older, quieter, like a city that carried its stories more quietly. The station walls were made of old stone. Outside, the streets were lined with brick buildings and narrow sidewalks. A cool autumn breeze moved through the air. Elena pulled her coat a little tighter. For a moment she simply stood there. A sudden thought crossed her mind. What exactly am I doing here? She didn't even know if Daniel was actually in the city. All she had was an address. And a mysterious symbol connected to love. Great planning, Elena, she muttered. Still, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the folded paper. Daniel's handwriting stared back at her. She looked at the address. It wasn't far. Just a short walk from the station. Her heart started beating a little faster. So she began walking. Philadelphia's streets felt almost cinematic. Old red brick houses. Iron street lamps. Small cafes tucked into corners. Every block seemed like a place where a story could hide. After 15 minutes of walking, Elena slowed down. She checked the address again. Then looked up. In front of her stood a narrow 3-story building with large windows on the ground floor. Above the door hung a wooden sign. The paint was slightly faded. It read, Maple and Ink. Elena frowned slightly. A bookstore. She looked again at the address. It matched. The bell above the door jingled softly as she pushed it open. The smell of paper and old wood immediately filled the air. Shelves stretched across the walls. And behind the counter, Daniel stood there. He looked up. For a moment his expression froze in complete surprise. Elena. She suddenly felt very aware of how impulsive this trip had been. Hi, she said awkwardly. Daniel blinked once, then laughed softly. Well, he said, shaking his head slightly. I suppose you really are someone who goes looking for stories. Elena folded her arms playfully. You did say some stories only find people who look for them. Daniel walked around the counter. His expression now carried something warmer than surprise. Something almost like quiet admiration. I didn't think you would come this soon. Honestly, Elena admitted, neither did I. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Elena glanced around the bookstore. So, this is where your mysterious adventures begin. Daniel smiled slightly. Not exactly. He leaned against one of the shelves. The adventures usually start outside. Elena raised an eyebrow. Outside where? Daniel looked toward the street beyond the window. Then back at her. In the places people don't notice. Elena narrowed her eyes playfully. You're being mysterious again. Daniel shrugged. Maybe. Then he reached into his coat pocket. Slowly, he pulled out that same folded paper. The one with the strange symbol. He opened it and placed it on the counter between them. The curved symbol rested under the warm lamplight. Elena leaned closer. This symbol, she said quietly. It's here, isn't it? Daniel met her eyes. Yes. Somewhere in this city. Outside, Philadelphia's quiet streets stretched endlessly between rows of old buildings. And somewhere among them, the first real clue to the symbol of love was waiting. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The small bookstore felt unusually quiet. The warm yellow lamp above the counter cast a soft glow over the strange symbol drawn on the paper. Elena studied it carefully. The shape was unusual, a curved line forming something that looked partly like a heart, but also like a compass pointing in different directions. Where did you find this? She asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched her reaction, as if he had been waiting for someone who would look at the symbol with the same curiosity. Years ago, he finally said, my grandfather showed it to me. Elena looked up. Your grandfather? Daniel nodded. He was a historian, or at least that's what people called him. What do you mean? Daniel smiled faintly. He didn't just study history. He chased stories. Elena folded her arms slightly. That sounds familiar. Daniel chuckled. Maybe that's why I liked talking to you that night. He tapped the paper lightly. My grandfather believed this symbol represented something real. Something hidden in Philadelphia. Elena leaned closer again. Hidden where? Daniel shook his head slowly. That's the problem. He never told me. Elena stared at him. You're kidding. I wish I were. Daniel leaned against the counter. He spent years searching. Old buildings, forgotten monuments, abandoned streets. And he died before he could finish. The words hung quietly between them. Elena looked down at the symbol again. So now you're continuing his search. Daniel nodded. I suppose I am. And you still believe it exists? Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes. Elena tilted her head slightly. You said earlier that finding it changes the way someone understands love. Daniel's expression softened. That's what he believed. And you? Daniel thought for a moment. I think some mysteries are worth chasing. Elena looked around the bookstore. Old shelves. Dusty books. Sunlight filtering faintly through the front window. Then she looked back at Daniel. So where do we start? Daniel smiled. You're assuming you're part of this now. Elena raised an eyebrow. You showed me the symbol. You gave me the mystery. And you practically invited me to Philadelphia. Daniel laughed softly. That's a fair point. He folded the paper again and slipped it back into his pocket. All right, he said. If you're really serious about this, I can show you the first place. Elena felt a small spark of excitement. First place. Daniel grabbed his coat from a chair. My grandfather's first clue. And where is that? Elena asked. Daniel walked toward the door and pushed it open. Cool Philadelphia air drifted inside the bookstore. He looked back at her. In a place most people visit every day, but never really see. Elena followed him outside. The street was quiet. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the brick sidewalks. Daniel started walking. After a few minutes, the narrow streets opened into a wide historic square. Tourists walked around taking pictures. Large trees swayed gently in the wind. And in the center stood a famous old building made of red brick and white trim. Daniel stopped. Elena looked at it and immediately recognized it. Independence Hall, she said. Daniel nodded slowly. My grandfather believed. He looked up at the old clock tower. That the first clue to the symbol of love is hidden somewhere right here. Elena crossed her arms. In one of the most famous landmarks in America. Daniel smiled slightly. Exactly. Elena looked again at the historic building. People were casually walking past it. Tour guides were giving speeches. Children were running across the grass. Everything looked normal. And yet, somewhere inside this historic place, a secret connected to love had been hiding for decades. Independence Hall stood quietly under the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. The red bricks of the historic building looked warm against the golden sky. Tourists moved around the square with cameras and guidebooks. A tour guide nearby was explaining something about the American Revolution, while a small group listened politely. To everyone else, it was just another historic landmark. But to Elena and Daniel, it suddenly felt like the beginning of something much bigger. Elena slowly walked a few steps closer to the building. You're telling me, she said, lowering her voice slightly, that the first clue to a mysterious symbol about love is hidden in one of the most studied buildings in American history. Daniel folded his arms. That's exactly why it might be here. Elena looked at him skeptically. That doesn't make it sound more believable. Daniel smiled faintly. My grandfather used to say that the best hiding places are the ones people stop looking at. Elena glanced around the square. Visitors were everywhere. No one seemed to notice anything unusual. So what exactly did your grandfather find here? She asked. Daniel reached into his coat pocket again. This time he pulled out a small, worn notebook. The leather cover was old and slightly cracked. My grandfather's notes, he said. Elena leaned closer. Daniel carefully opened the notebook. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, small sketches and tiny maps. Some of the ink had faded with time. Elena noticed something familiar drawn in the corner of one page. The same symbol. The curved heart-like compass. She pointed at it. He kept drawing it. Daniel nodded. He believed it wasn't just a symbol. What do you mean? Daniel turned the notebook toward her. Look closely. Elena studied the drawing. At first it just looked like the same curved shape. But then she noticed something strange. The ends of the symbol pointed in slightly different directions. Almost like markers. Wait, she said slowly. Is this a map? Daniel smiled. That's exactly what my grandfather thought. Elena looked from the symbol to the building in front of them. If it's a map, then what is it pointing to? Daniel flipped another page. There was a rough sketch of Independence Hall. The tower. The windows. The front steps. And beside the sketch, a single handwritten sentence. Daniel read it aloud quietly. The answer hides where time watches over freedom. Elena frowned slightly. That sounds like a riddle. It is, Daniel said. She looked back at the building. Her eyes slowly moved upward. until they stopped at the tall clock tower above Independence Hall. "Time," she whispered. Daniel followed her gaze. "Exactly." For a moment, both of them simply stared at the tower clock. The hands of the clock moved slowly. Tick, tick, tick. Elena crossed her arms thoughtfully. "Okay, so the clue mentions time. And the clock tower is the most obvious connection." Daniel nodded. "But it might not be that simple." Elena looked back at him. "When are riddles ever simple?" Daniel laughed quietly. "Fair point." They began walking toward the building. The closer they got, the larger the tower seemed. The old clock face gleamed softly in the fading sunlight. Elena suddenly felt a strange excitement building inside her. 3 days ago, she had been living an ordinary life. Now she was standing in front of Independence Hall, trying to solve a mysterious riddle hidden in history. "Your grandfather must have spent a lot of time here," she said. Daniel nodded. "He visited this place dozens of times. And he never solved the riddle." Daniel shook his head. "No." He paused for a moment. "But he believed he was close." Elena looked up again at the clock. The long hand moved slowly. The evening air was beginning to cool. And somewhere within this historic building, the first secret connected to the symbol of love was waiting to be discovered. Elena and Daniel slowly walked across the square toward Independence Hall. The closer they got, the quieter Elena became. The building felt different up close. The red bricks were darker with age, and the tall white clock tower seemed to watch over the entire square like a silent guardian. Tourists moved around them, taking photographs and listening to guides talk about the founding of a nation. But Elena wasn't listening. Her attention was fixed on the clock above. Tick, tick, tick. "Where exactly did your grandfather think the clue was?" she asked quietly. Daniel opened the old notebook again as they walked. "He wrote that the symbol aligns with 3 points," Daniel said, flipping through a few pages. "3 points?" Elena asked. Daniel stopped near the front lawn and turned the notebook so she could see. Inside the sketch of Independence Hall, 3 tiny marks had been drawn. One pointed to the clock tower. Another pointed toward the Liberty Bell building nearby. And the third mark pointed somewhere behind the main building. Elena leaned closer. "So the symbol is pointing to 3 places." Daniel nodded. "My grandfather believed the symbol wasn't just a drawing. It's a guide." Elena looked back at the symbol again in the notebook. The curved lines suddenly looked different to her. Less like art. More like directions. "If that's true," she said slowly, "then the first clue should be somewhere near the clock." Daniel glanced up at the tower. That's what he thought too. A park ranger walked past them, greeting a group of visitors. The building was still open for tour. Daniel closed the notebook. "Come on," he said. "Let's go inside." Elena felt a small thrill of excitement. They walked up the stone path and entered the historic building along with a group of visitors. Inside, the air felt cooler. Old wooden floors creaked under their footsteps. Large windows allowed soft evening light to spill into the hallway. Portraits of historical figures lined the walls. For a moment, Elena almost forgot why they were there. The building felt like stepping directly into the past. Daniel leaned closer to her and whispered, "The clock mechanism is above the main hall." Elena raised an eyebrow. "You've been here before." "Many times." "And..." Daniel gave a small shrug. "I never found anything." They slowly followed the tour group through the hallway. A guide spoke enthusiastically about debates and declarations that had shaped the country. But Daniel's attention was somewhere else. He kept glancing upward, toward the tower. Finally, the group entered the large assembly room. Tall windows, green-covered tables, wooden chairs arranged in careful rows. It was the room where history had once been written. But Elena noticed something else. Near the back walls, a narrow staircase, old, partially hidden behind a wooden barrier. She nudged Daniel gently. "Is that?" Daniel followed her gaze. His eyes widened slightly. "That staircase leads to the tower." A small sign nearby read, "Authorized personnel only." Elena folded her arms. "Well," she whispered, "that looks promising." Daniel exhaled slowly. "My grandfather tried to get up there once. And they wouldn't let him." Elena glanced toward the distracted tour guide. Then back at the staircase. A small mischievous smile appeared on her face. "Good thing we're a little more adventurous." But Daniel stared at her. "You're not seriously suggesting?" But Elena had already started walking. Slowly, casually, toward the staircase. Daniel sighed quietly, then followed her. Because somewhere above them, inside the old clock tower of Independence Hall, the first real secret of the symbol of love might finally be waiting.